I would say it's been an interesting journey because I moved to Sweden over 5 years ago and witnessed some of the best social support systems in the world. Everyone has access to free education, everyone has access to healthcare. There's pretty much no homelessness, everyone is taken care of. There are some problems, but it's like everywhere you go is like being in the nice neighborhoods of the US. In the US, you don't want to go to certain areas. So it's a very big difference. But one of the best reads I've had recently was Peter Zion's book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. Really great read where he talks about the geopolitics of the world and just the amount of resources, the amount of innovation, and the strategic dominance of the United States. I mean, the being energy independent and not having to worry about oil, having nearly all of the different important resources either controlled by the United States or controlled by one of our very close allies like Australia or Canada, which are very natural resource dense areas. And also not having many enemies close by. I mean, if you look at China, China is completely oil dependent, completely food dependent, and all of that relies on resources that are across the world. So if they ever have a problem with someone, or if the US isn't policing the oceans like we have, and we're talking about tankers potentially getting stolen or getting blockaded, then we're talking about no oil and no food. And you can't really be the factory of the world and keep your people happy if you can't do that. So that was a great read. I feel super bullish on the United States. So much innovation comes out of there. I mean, Sweden is a great place. There's a lot of good stuff happening, but not on the scale of the United States when we look at innovation. I mean, Elon's launching rockets. Elon wants to live his whole life in the United States. He's definitely the best entrepreneur ever, the GOAT, so to say. And so, yeah, I feel very good about the position that the US is in moving forward, for
Mhm.
sure.
And
Yeah.
then in addition, Canada to the north with vast resources, and then now Mexico coming forward as a potential manufacturing powerhouse. Not even potential. I think it's uh, absolutely going to happen and is in the works currently. A lot of talent being developed in Mexico. I think also in terms of like programming and technology and innovation, uh, but manufacturing, low cost manufacturing is going to be absolutely massive. So we're talking about the US, but really we're kind of talking about North America because
Yes.
that alliance is truly what makes the United States, I wouldn't say strong in itself, but expands on the strength massively. So
Yes.
resources, manufacturing, and then everything that the U.S. has to offer, two coastlines. So as much as people want to doubt it, at the end of the day, it's still relatively the most stable, has the most potential, uh, and that's going to be the case for a long time.
Definitely, definitely, and especially even in his book is incredibly detailed, so highly recommend anyone read it. It's like a history and resource and geopolitics lesson, really fun to listen to. I listened to it on audiobook and yeah, but one interesting takeaway as well is the US is so well positioned for renewables. One thing I see is so much of Europe is more focused on renewables than the US, but in many places in Europe, renewables do not make sense because there's not enough sunlight, there's not enough wind. You have to put those resources where there's wind, where there's sunlight. If you're making a bunch of wind turbines and they're sitting there not spinning, you're actually producing emissions and you're not net zero if it doesn't produce enough energy. So you look at places like Germany that are shutting down their nuclear power. They have very little sunlight. It's not a good place for solar. It's not a good place for wind. There's a few pockets around the world where this stuff makes a lot of sense. And the US gets a ton of sunlight in different regions, gets a ton of wind in different regions. There's great hydropower. There's lots of gas. And so really resource dense, and energy is what runs the world at the end of the day. Sending a pair of shoes to someone costs, 2 cents or so to ship across the world right now with how we've standardized things with containers. If we talk about fuel shifting price or the risk of sending those tankers shifting, then all of that trade starts to deteriorate and we get these smaller pockets of trade partners, I think is what we'll see, especially in our lifetime. I mean, the latest report I saw is we have 40 plus years or so of oil left, and we'll see. Those reports are always changing, but the bottom line is so much of the world is based on oil, and especially on the plastics that come from that. Everything surrounding both of us right now is using those fossil fuels to create plastics and devices. So it's really going to be, in our lifetime, I think we will see the crunch of that, and we'll be able to find alternatives, but they're going to be more expensive. Not everyone in the world is going to have access to them. And so, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how things develop.
Yeah, yeah. Energy is a massive point of strength for the U.S. And I think, as you mentioned, Germany is probably the poster child of what not to do in terms of energy. I think they've made every wrong move personally. That's obviously up for opinion.
Yeah.
But I think that's clearly going to have a massively negative effect on them, who've been a leader in innovation. And I feel like they're moving kind of in the opposite direction. In some ways, that's going to hinder them significantly from what they're doing. And they're putting a lot of effort into an industry that isn't actually really going to help them, which seems like it's more politically motivated than it is and ideologically motivated rather than economically motivated. And so I think they're continuing to hinder themselves when in the past they've been an absolute powerhouse in terms of technology and innovation. And I'd say they still are, but they're definitely being hindered significantly.